Hello and welcome to the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. And on today's episode, I'm very excited to be speaking with Heneka Watkis-Porter. Heneka is an entrepreneur, coach, 5-time author, international speaker, and host of the Entrepreneurial You Podcast. She's interviewed Richard Branson, Lee Dumas, Seth Godin, and many other influencers. Heneka is also the creator of the Caribbean's first virtual conference and expo, the Entrepreneurial You Virtual SME Conference and Expo. She hosts Leadercast events in Jamaica and writes for the Leadercast blog and Thrive Global. Heneka, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Carolyn. It is my absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Yes, me as well. So you speak on a lot of different topics as an entrepreneur, a leader, a podcaster, and one that I really love to dive in with you today on this show is about how to develop into a leader who's worth following. So, I mean, in your definition, what makes a leader worth following, and how do you define that?
Okay, so first of all, leadership is really influence. Your ability to influence your sphere, those around you. It's not about control. Let me just say, first of all, it's not about control or even management, but it's about that ability to influence others to an action. And that action can be positive or negative, right? But we want to focus on the positive action, right? Because we have influences, we see around the world, we have some dominant forces who are able to influence negatively, but we also see people who have that ability to influence in a very positive way to effect positive change. Now, when I talk about a leader worth following, I'm talking about someone who, when you think about them, they are able to do the actions, not just command you to do things or suggest you do things, or a lot of times you hear people say do as I say and not as I do.
Right.
But then it's all about saying what you mean and meaning what you say, and so there's a level of authenticity and so many other traits that we can talk about later as you go along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. As a leader, there's a lot of different ways to influence people, and it's not really just that control, as you said, not telling people what to do, but there's just so many other ways to influence and bring people along with your vision as a leader.
Right. And I've had to learn the hard way, because for me, along the way, you just thought that so first of all, we're not even taught to be leaders. We're just thrust into some positions, and it's almost as if, the thought is automatically you're supposed to perform a particular way. And so even when I started my own business in 2007, I had no idea about leadership. I as a matter of fact, when I left my full-time job to pursue entrepreneurship full-time, I never even had a supervisor position. Right. So I just left. I mean, I was at the top of my grade in the area that in my field, but I was never at the supervisory level, never had the supervisory experience. But persons have always told me, you have leadership qualities, and I guess what they mean by that is that, I'm able to command and stuff. But at the end of the day, I learned so much more. Like when I started my business, I recognized that, what? The aggressive approach will not always work, and that's hindsight, because I thought, I have a business, and I was so passionate and driven about the business, and so I have this business, and I'm thinking to myself, well, this is what you need to do, get it done, no questions asked, and so on, without taking personalities into consideration. That is so critical, because sometimes we just want to bring a one-size-fits-all approach, and everybody should react in a particular way. The job is to get done. Just get it done without thinking, what? This person may not be a type A personality. This person may perhaps be someone who, really likes to be told what to do, but then somebody else wants to have that level of independence, and so the micromanaging and all of that. So there are so many different things that come into play. One of the things too, Caroline, that I thought about was, and that is in hindsight, was I wanted my team to have the same level of passion that I did, and that it was so unfair. It was too much of an expectation to bring to bear. So even when they were doing their very best, because they were not doing it in a way that I believe, they were passionate and as driven, then no matter what they did, they just did not measure up. And it's just looking back, I recognize, wow, that was such a disservice to them and false expectation.
Yeah. And that's so interesting that you said that your first real experiences being a leader came when you started your own business. And that's such a challenging time when you're literally learning everything from how to put the business together. And then, adding on to that, how to be a leader and how to bring other people along, how to learn how to delegate. There's just so much that goes into leadership. And as you said, very rarely do we actually learn how to be leaders. We just kind of get thrust into the position, many of us. So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'm curious, you started sharing sort of your early experiences as a leader, mentioned some of the challenges that you faced early on. How did you kind of come to realize that, maybe some of the leadership techniques or assumptions that I'm making aren't quite working for people or the business? And how did you kind of work on those?
Great question, Caroline. Over time, I think I became more emotionally intelligent to recognize where people are at, and there is something I've learned recently, which I keep telling myself and telling others, that we need to give others grace to grow. Not everybody's going to get to the place that we want to get them to overnight. And in the last couple of years, particularly, because along the way, I've had many leadership positions. I've had I've been leading church activities, leading community activities, of course, my businesses and so on. But I think it really dawned on me, maybe perhaps about 2 years ago too, when I started hosting Leadercast events. And those were just, eye-opening for me, even when I heard the speakers, the presenters. When we talk about, and then I began to do my own research as well into leadership and watch and look at some of the leaders, the person I consider to be excellent leaders, because just like success leaves clues, so does leadership. And the persons that you admire and they've done it before you, why go and reinvent the wheel? Study them, see what it is that their mistakes. And so even my own missteps, like I've learned along the way that vulnerability, for example, is such a critical trait to have as a leader, right? You always want to get to the point where you're able to say, I am wrong, or I don't have the answer, right? Not just I'm sorry. Let me go back to that. Not just I'm sorry, but I was wrong. I am sorry. Please forgive me. Because a lot of persons, when they talk about being sorry, they're not really admitting to the fact that they were wrong. They're admitting to the fact that perhaps they're a little bashful that persons feel the way they do or react the way they do, but not recognizing that your actions, your words may have caused somebody else pain, or your lack of action, or whatever it is, or and to apologize. So I talk about that place of being vulnerable. Also talk about the fact that your authentic self, bring your authentic self to the game. And one of the things that I've always liked to, to say to persons, that what you see is what you get. And so to that end, you also have to balance that too, because persons can be really offended by what you're bringing, what your real self is bringing. And so sometimes just tapering that, not to be inauthentic, but to not vent when you need to, be a little more tactful, and so on like that. So reading, the ability to read the pulse of a room is so critical as a leader, recognizing where the thought process is among, you're not a mind reader, but reading persons, emotions, reading their body language, because body language, more than even verbal communication, says a lot more than what, persons they're saying with their mouth. So reading that pulse of the room and understanding where everybody is at a particular given point in time is another important trait, that being a leader that is worth following, you need to be able to demonstrate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And especially in terms of really having that emotional intelligence, being able to read people, because coaching and feedback is such an important part of leadership. And I think a lot of leaders early on tend to think that, as long as they're giving the feedback, it doesn't matter so much how it's delivered, but that really is a critical part. And that's sometimes as tricky as figuring out how to, having the courage to deliver that feedback, and then thinking about, well, how do I deliver it in a way where the person's going to hear me or has the best chance of hearing me and really understanding what they need to do differently.
Yeah, and so one of the things for me, Caroline, that I've learned to do is to use a sandwich approach, right? So if it is I have negative, something that is not so quite positive to share, right? Bad news, or you're giving feedback. There's always something good in any situation that you can find. Mm-hmm. So first you start with that, you are an excellent team member. I like how you always, communicate how you feel about things. And that means a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So share that information. And then you say, there is a little challenge that I'm picking up here. And it may not be, I may be misinterpreting, because you always want to leave room for the fact that, guess what? You may be wrong. Mm-hmm. So, I may have misread you. I may have misunderstood when you said this, but it really caused me pain. I was unhappy about what you said. And so you're able to give feedback. You're not attacking the person to say, hey, you said that and I didn't like it and it was offensive. And so it puts that other person in the position now to get defensive, and instead of a conversation and a one-on-one connection. Right. And then having talked that through, then at the end of your communication, let not your communication end on a negative note either. Let it be that, but then remember, again, because of how you are, we're always able to be aware of what is happening and how your feelings are and so on. So you're ending again on a very positive note. So you're sandwiching your negative feedback with positive ones, and that will leave somebody feeling, not dejected and feeling like they have, they're the worst person in this world, but they feel motivated because they do recognize the fact that you're also giving praise at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the example that you shared also illustrated an important point, is that you don't want to attack the person for, being a bad person or a not competent person. You're focusing on the behavior or the impact and really showing, like, this is what happened, this is the impact it had. And so hopefully that makes people a little less defensive, although
yes. You see, because at the end of the day, Caroline, I think what everybody wants is to be understood. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, everybody is coming from a place of they're having their own issues, and people react based on their environment, where they are, whether emotionally, physically, psychologically, mentally. All of these things play a very important role, and they have done us a disservice in the world of work and hustle and grind to say it's all about the work and just focus on that and just keep going no matter the cost. And particularly women have it even more difficult, because we're seen as weak and emotional when we take time to address these soft areas, but they are of vital importance that we take the time to address them and not be a one size fit all and it's all about hustle and grind. We have to make space for people to be human. Mm-hmm. And if we want to prevent things like burnout, and I can talk to burnout, like that's another topic I could talk to you about, because even though I'm on the recovery, and if we want to leave space for that, we must allow people to be human.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I always find it with the movement now towards leadership, there's a lot of talk about being, as you mentioned, a vulnerable leader, leading with empathy, connecting, collaborating. And I'm always like, who's really good at that, as it tends to be, is women. Maybe it's a real way to bring in more, traits that are traditionally associated with women and making leadership more holistic and powerful.
Oh yeah, we're naturally wired for that. It's in our DNA, and over time, because of the women's liberation, and I'm all for women's liberation, but we need to get back to the space where we are very feminine, and we lead with sensitivity, right? And not about all the time the does and the cents. Those that are very critical, I will not discount, but also important for your entire well-being, for a holistic approach, is the fact that we need to give space for the humanity.
Yeah. mean, we spend so much time at work, and especially entrepreneurs like you are, it's so much a part of your life. You spend so many hours and hours in your business that you need that humanity, because it's, there's much less of a separation between work and life in these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that is interesting. You just mentioned that you had an experience of burnout, which I imagine many entrepreneurs who spend so much time and energy on their business have that experience potentially, or run that risk. So will you share a little bit about your experience with burnout and kind of where you wound up with that?
Listen, that's a whole different episode, Caroline. Let me tell you something. I've always been going, and I've been one to do a lot, start businesses, and always having so many things going on. I'm writing, I'm podcasting, I'm traveling, I'm speaking, and the list goes on, right? I'm a wife, all of that, have family, have other obligations, and I've just been going without taking the time to listen to my body, to pause. Of course, in April of this year, my body decides, okay, no, you won't listen to me. No, you're going to have to listen. And I crashed. I literally crashed. A myriad of symptoms and physical ailments, a depression that was so dark, it's not funny. Because of some medication I was taking, it sent me into a depression. Just passing out, all the physical things that you could think of. At the end of the day, having gone to like 10 doctors and so on, at the end of the day, I started seeing a naturopath, and I've now switched my diet to a vegan lifestyle, and just changed my lifestyle overall. And that is what has helped me with what has been now diagnosed by my naturopath as adrenal fatigue. And adrenal fatigue is tricky, because doctors can't really, or medical doctors don't readily put a finger to it, because the symptoms that you face could be anything, really, right? And so it is so much more difficult for it to be diagnosed. But having done my own research and going on and on trying to figure out what was wrong with me, I came up with my own diagnosis. And of course, when I went to the naturopath, she came up with that as well. And I've been on treatment for that. And it's a painstaking slow process of healing for someone who is always on the go and can go a day, like an entire 24-hour day, and not need rest. No, I have to really space my activities out for the day, and and rejuvenate and all of that, because I still get fatigued very easily. So I'm speaking from this place of, as a leader, I know what it is to face burnout. I know what it is to try and go. But right now I'm in the space, and having experienced that and still experiencing it, it has helped me to kind of shift my message and my focus, so that even coming up, I'm having a health summit out of this experience. That's going to be in January. And I'm talking about, just 5 different speakers we're having, talking about some topics like mental health, how you take care of your mental health, and talk about adrenal fatigue, talk about things like magnesium and why it's important, and all of these things. So it's not all bad, because out of it comes a good situation, and my lifestyle has changed, my diet has changed, and doing more exercising and taking care of my health. Because another thing too, as leaders, we must be able to take care of those around us. How are we going to take care of those around us if we're not even taking care of our very own selves? Because we cannot give from an empty cup. And it's so important when we go on planes. I mean, we're not traveling a lot now, if any, like we used to right now. But first thing you hear, they will tell you is, should there be a problem, put your own mask on first, right? It tells you it is important to take care of yourself. Self-care is not selfish. It's actually very selfless, because then you have more of you and more energy to take care of those around you, your team members, your family members, those who, your constituents, those who rely upon you. So that's an important segment of leadership. I remember the last one, I think it was the first Leadercast event I hosted with Michael Hyatt. He was one of the speakers. And he spent a whole lot of time, I think in 2018, and he talked a lot about self-care. No, I should have been listening more keenly to him, right? And taking his advice. But I had to learn the hard way. And it's a lesson that is not lost on me as a leader.
Absolutely. And it's so important to remind people that you have to take care of yourself, of course, for yourself, but also if you are a leader, in order to be able to make sure that you're taking care of, or just giving the space and support that your people need. And, especially this year with, the pandemic. And I think that everybody, or maybe not everybody, many people are probably on the edge of burnout or possibly have burned out. So it's just even more critical now. And, as an entrepreneur yourself, I imagine that the pandemic probably had impacts on your business or the way that you would run your business or lead your team. So have you sort of had a shift in a way this year?
I tell people all the time that the period of health challenge that I went through made the pandemic look like a walk in the park. Wow. I kid you not. Wow. Yeah. I mean, luckily for me, I never felt the full effects like a lot of people did, because I was already at home, working from home and online. And it was like my lifestyle, right? In the first couple of weeks in March, when we had it hit here for the first time, and then, in my health challenge began in April, in that first few, I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I felt fear, to be honest with you, more than anything else. And not fear necessarily for me, but fear for, those that were around me, and how, especially those that were, in the high risk groups. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I was so fearful because I didn't know anything. And I was researching this virus more than anything else. And that I realized began to get a lot. And so I kind of stopped that. But then in April, like further down in April, the health began to really get affected. And so it was more about trying to figure out what was wrong with me, trying to get healing and so on. And I believe as we talk about leadership and the ability to read the pulse of the room, we must not only be able to read the pulse of the room, but the pulse of the time. And so this time here was a time for us to slow down. It was a time for us to slow down. And I did that. I had to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned that you work from home primarily, do the people that you manage, are they primarily working from different locations? I mean, now I'm sure they are, but in general.
Right. Because I have very limited team. Most of my team members are, my virtual assistants. They're based on as the need arise. So that shift has been easy for me with them working. They've always been working remotely as well.
Yeah. Are there special challenges or considerations that you have to take into account having a team that's always remote, where maybe it's just a different way to manage, as opposed to having people who you get to see every day and sit down with and kind of read their facial expressions or body language? Sort of how is it different in a way that you approach that?
Well, having gotten used to the fact that they're not in my present environment, having got used to the fact that I have to, because they're not full-time either, I have to work with their time. And that's one of the most difficult thing is working with their time and trying to find a compromise in terms of where they're at and where I'm at and what the need is. So I've learned actually to work with them in that way.
Yeah, and that probably requires a lot of, focus on time management and just managing prioritization and delegation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you have a podcast and you interview a lot of really great and well-known leaders on that as well. How do you select the people? Do you select them for their leadership, reputation, and actions, or kind of how do you pick people to be on the show?
So I look for what they've accomplished. I look for one of the things for me is I'm big on their digital footprint. Sometimes depending on what topic I'm looking for, I'm dealing with name recognition. It's just a myriad of things, but authenticity in what they present to the table and what they can offer my community. So there are a myriad of factors that I look for, that will have determined whether or not somebody's a guest on the Entrepreneurial You. Many people have come to learn that, people like Richard Branson and Seth Godin and other persons have been on the show, and they're like, oh my gosh, how did you make it happen? But it's just been very strategic.
Right. That's really fascinating. Was it something that you had to kind of build up your brand first in order to attract well-known guests, or how did you approach them?
So the strategy really was, okay, so let me find one person who I build a relationship with. And I didn't even realize that was what was happening, initially. Like, I was building relationship with Lee Dumas because I was loving what he was doing, what he was bringing to the table. And then over time, having had him on my show, then it became easier for other persons to come on, you know what I mean? So using his name as reference and all of that. So it was that strategy that I used at the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's, kind of helps reinforce the reputation of the brand, and just,
yes, and
a lot
social
of people
proofing.
Exactly. No, exactly. And
Yeah.
a lot of people kind of are in the same or similar circles in the podcasting, the leadership world as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, gosh, and, as you interview people like Seth Godin, Richard Branson, Lee Dumas, do you find that a lot of the leadership, I don't know if it's advice or just philosophies that they share, do you find them to be like extremely unique and compelling versus, maybe other sort of average?
The truth is, a lot of these ideas because ideas are not new, right, to be honest with you, and they're not unique either. It's just their own personal spin on them and their ability to practice what they preach. Mm-hmm. Right? So with consistency as well, because at the end of the day, consistency is key. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Everybody have them, right? But it's how you apply, your own self to the ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is critical, is that consistency. No, absolutely. Mm-hmm. You shared earlier a lot of the stories and things that you learned starting out as an entrepreneur about leadership and some of the challenges that you faced. What, kind of looking back, what advice would you give, say, to a new entrepreneur who's, like you, maybe managing people for the first time and also trying to build a business and kind of wear many, many hats? Sort of, what do you have, sort of a couple pieces of advice you would share in terms of either things to look out for or things to make sure that they do as a leader?
Get a mentor. Believe me, from the very get-go, I would have had a mentor. Mentorship, we discount the value of it, but it's so important. It's like you're getting another pair of ears, another mind, just to give you ideas and to share ideas and to share their pitfalls, where they would have gone wrong over time, and they would have learned from that, and so can help you to prevent having made those same mistakes. So mentorship is key. Get somebody, and you know what, in this day and age, mentorship doesn't even have to be somebody who is with you all the time. You can single-handedly decide to select somebody online who you value their ideas, you value their thoughts, and you study them, right? You study them, and then from there you develop your own persona, your own traits as a leader, as an entrepreneur. But find somebody who you can say, okay, this is my mentor. I'm going to study this person.
Oh, wow. So
even if you don't have them physically.
Oh, wow. So even, finding people, as you meant, finding people online and kind of following what they write and what they do. So it sounds like mentorship, you don't necessarily have to have the ability to have one-on-one constant conversations with someone. It's broader than that.
Right. And when the time is right, I mean, if you, like, even in the case of Lee Dumas, when the time was right, I was able to reach out to him. So when the time is right, you can reach out, and you would have initially not been following this person because you want anything, but you genuinely like what they're doing and you see them as an example. And so, it makes sense. It's a no-brainer for you to connect with that person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there is a lot of information out there. There are a lot of great leaders, and especially with social media and the online world, people are sharing more and more these days. Where would you recommend is a good place to, if you're just starting out looking for a mentor or things to read, where would you recommend that someone start out looking for a mentor?
I am a big fan of John C. Maxwell, huge fan. So, I mean, he has a lot of books, he has a lot of videos online, for example, and there are so many entrepreneurs. My first book that really inspired me to want to become an entrepreneur was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. changed the way I think about things. It was a shift for me. So that's a book I would recommend on the basis of entrepreneurship and just different, in terms of your mindset and your approach to work and entrepreneurship and so on. And then for leadership, like I said, John Maxwell.
Right. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, definitely very popular books and very influential books and leaders as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. So yeah, Heneka, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the work that you do or your podcast or things like that?
Okay, great. So HenekaWatkis-Porter.com. Of course, the spelling I'm sure would be on the podcast,
Yes.
Show notes. So, and I'm all over social media, but my one-stop shop is HenekaWatkis-Porter.com. And you can, guess what? Send me a message directly to WhatsApp from my homepage. So if you see the WhatsApp icon, just send a message there and it comes directly to my phone. I mean, I do coaching, both business, entrepreneurship and podcast coaching, as well as mastermind groups. So, or anything you want to reach out, you want to get, you want us to discuss doing some form of a coaching or so, just connect with me, talk about leadership, talk about entrepreneurship. I'm there.
Right. Fantastic. And I will put a link to your website in the show notes so that people can click on it and get right in touch with you easily.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, thanks again, Heneka, for being on my podcast. Is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything that they can help or support you with?
Oh, sure. So first of all, leadership is a journey. It's not a destination. And I want us to think that, you learn, and every day you learn new things, you learn mistakes. There's no one manual for that. You just learn along the way, but you have to be intentional about learning and developing. That's what I want to part with as a piece of advice. But I also want to, coming up soon, I'm sure by the time this podcast goes live, then I'll have the information ready for the upcoming Slow Down and Live Health is Wealth. Health Summit, virtual health summit. So I'll share that with you as well to share with your community.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. Well, yeah, thank you again, Heneka, for being on my podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Caroline. I really enjoyed it too. Thanks.